The world has been on Ukraine's side all through this war, but the fight is far from over. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy has now come out and said that he wanted the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or the NATO, to send Ukraine a clear signal at the summit next month that it can join the military alliance when Russia's war on its country ends. Kyiv has in its recent weeks, remember, pressed NATO over the membership bid and has pressed NATO even for demands of security guarantees. Now, next month, on the 11th and 12th of July, is when the key NATO summit is going to take place. But unfortunately for Ukraine, there has been no confirmation on its inclusion just yet. In fact, the NATO chief just yesterday said that power of Russia's military shouldn't be underestimated. That is something that should be looked into. Take a look at what the status of Ukraine's NATO membership bid is, what's at stake, not just for Ukraine, but for the world at large.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy urged NATO on Wednesday to send his country a clear signal that it can join the military alliance, saying he would like to get that signal at next month's NATO summit in Lithuania.
We understand that while the war is ongoing, we can't become a member of NATO. However, we need to be sure that after the war, we will become a member. That's the signal we want to get, that after the war, Ukraine will become a NATO member.
Zelensky made the comments at a press conference alongside the presidents from Poland and Lithuania, who made a surprise visit to Kyiv and vowed to do everything they can to ensure that Ukraine becomes a member of NATO as soon as possible. The two visiting leaders also expressed concern over the arrival of Russian mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin in Belarus, where he has gone into exile after leading his Wagner private militia in a stunning but brief mutiny against Moscow. Earlier on Wednesday, Zelensky said in a speech to Parliament on Ukraine's Constitution Day that global leaders should stop thinking about how the Kremlin would react to Ukraine joining NATO and described Russia's leaders as bandits.
The political and military leadership of the Russian Federation should not escape justice due to the fact that they supposedly have immunity as state leaders. They are not leaders of the state. They are bandits who seized control of the state institutions of Russia. And they became brazen with impunity and began to terrorize the whole world.
Zelensky said he also hopes to receive security guarantees at the summit in July to help protect Ukraine until it's accepted as a NATO member. Though Ukraine wants to join as quickly as possible, NATO is divided over how fast that step should be taken. The United States and Germany in particular are wary of moves they fear could take the alliance closer to entering an active war with Russia, which has long seen NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe as evidence of Western hostility. Zelensky said it was unfortunate that some world leaders still, quote, look back at Russia when making their own decisions. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces are engaged in a counter-offensive aimed at retaking Russian-held territory in the country's east. Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade released this video on Wednesday, showing what it said was its soldiers storming Russian positions during fighting near Bakhmut. Reuters was not immediately able to independently verify the location or the date the video was filmed.
The summit is going to take place next month. It's on the 11th and 12th of July. A lot of pressure has been put by Volodymyr Zelenskiy and by Kyiv to ensure their entry into the NATO alliance. But there's a lot of pressure from the Russian side as well. Unfortunately for Volodymyr Zelenskiy and his country, NATO alliance has been non-committal as far as their inclusion goes. Whether that stand is cleared or not after the summit, that is something that Volodymyr Zelenskiy is definitely pinning his hopes on. Sanjay Suri, my colleague, continues to be with us. And Sanjay, it is important for Ukraine to be part of this military alliance, to be part of NATO. What seems to be the impediment, though? Why is NATO non-committal on their inclusion?
Well, this commitment to bring Ukraine into NATO was made as far back as 2008. And since then, we've had renewal of commitments on the principle of including Ukraine, but of course we've had no inclusion and no commitment even now on inclusion of Ukraine. We have statements of intent, but Ukraine clearly is looking for more than that. Ukraine has been told that while the war is on, this cannot be considered, and Ukraine itself is saying that, well, we would need a commitment that this would happen after the war, and so far there is no commitment on that. And the question over the Vilnius summit is whether such a commitment will be made. What holds NATO back is very clearly the fact that if Ukraine were to become a part of NATO, then NATO would have to fight this war. This would not be Ukraine's war, it would be NATO's war, it would be America's war, France's war, Germany's war, Britain's war. Every power would have to be involved in the fighting. That would mean a direct war between all these forces and the Russians. And that clearly is something NATO is not very keen to get into in a hurry.
Right, perhaps the summit is when that decision is taken, perhaps not. We'll have to wait and watch out for. But Sanjay, thank you so much for joining us and getting us the latest.